Gentlemen, if there are any ladies and gentlemen who ever listen to me, we are talking with Harley Schlanger again on Robert Mueller because we have an update on Robert Mueller. I want to thank you for watching the other broadcasts we did with Harley. We were up way over 4,000 viewers, and that was thanks to Claudia, who hooked it up onto Cabin Talk. So we will see how you all do with spreading this news around, because I think it's very important. And Harley, I looked over what you sent me today, and it's pretty hot stuff, and it explains further what Mueller has been up to and why it is important for all of us to know what Mueller has been up to. So if you want to give a whatever kind of intro you need to, we probably have to bring a few people who haven't seen the other video up onto the same playing field. And in the meantime, I want to let people know that I am writing a book review of the Bush-Cheney, how they ruined America and the world. And it's funny, I was going to do a metaphor with Lucifer and his legions, but I decided that was a bit too theatrical. So anyway, here we are with Harley Schlanger. So give us whatever introduction you think we need to know about Mueller, and then tell us what he's up to right now.
Well, let's start with the big picture, which is that there's one thing they're right about, that is Trump is guilty of obstruction. He's trying to obstruct the policies of Bush and Obama when it comes to world politics. He's trying to break with them. And from the very beginning, this whole case was never about a Russian meddling or Trump collusion with Russia. That's what they sold to the population. The real issue was that the people who run this country, the people whose policies have been in for most of the Cold War period, going back to World War II, are about to lose everything because of the emergence of a new power in the world, which is an Eurasian power, the alliance between Russia and China, and the move away from the geopolitical arena in which British, NATO, the U.S., with allies like Israel and Saudi Arabia, determine policy. And that whole era is over. And we saw it end in Syria. We saw it end with Brexit. We saw it end with the Trump election. Because as successful as the enemy has been in blocking the reality of the world situation to most Americans, enough Americans realized we were going in the wrong direction and that Hillary Clinton was going to take us further in that direction. So they voted her out. They voted for Trump. Now, from that standpoint, what's Mueller been up to? Well, he got another plea agreement. What's the plea agreement with Michael Flynn? That he lied to the FBI. About what? About his talk with the Russian ambassador. Now, was there anything illegal about Michael Flynn talking to Russian ambassador Sergei Kislyak? No, nothing. It's not a violation of the Logan Act, which some people are talking about, because Flynn was not a private citizen. The Logan Act specifically states are not intervene in foreign policy. But Flynn was acting as the incoming national security advisor to a president. And what was the content of his discussion? Obama had just implemented new sanctions against Russia, throwing out 35 diplomats. It included shutting down bank accounts and certain other kinds of hostile acts. And what Flynn told the Russian ambassador is, don't overreact to this. Now, that's what incoming administrations do. They establish new ties with foreign powers. That's all he was doing. Now, if that's all Mueller has, and it appears to me that all he can do is get a few people on technical things like lying to the FBI, where's the evidence that there was Russian meddling in the election? That Trump was working, that it was due to Vladimir Putin? There's no evidence. So all we're seeing is an obstruction by Mueller and the people behind him of the attempt to break away from a provocative and dangerous policy of the Bush and Obama administrations. And I think if Trump were more articulate on this matter, if he spoke more clearly about what he was trying to do, working with Putin against terrorism, working with the Chinese on the possibility of global infrastructure plans, were he to be able to do that, the American people would applaud, because we're tired of wars, we're tired of bailouts, we're tired of austerity. We need a new regime. So I think the most important thing is what we see with what I wrote in the article I sent you, Jim, is that what the Flynn charge, the guilty plea shows, is they're grasping at straws. They have nothing. And the whole Russiagate is nothing but an effort to keep Trump within the old geopolitics.
Well, there are a few different questions that I have suddenly springing into mind. And one is something having to do with the deep state, which has to be behind, even deeper behind than the DNC, with what Mueller is up to. So if you could go a little bit deeper into what you think, if there is anything deeper, as to what Mueller is doing, other than taking orders from the DNC, and that's certainly part of it because of those laughable attempts. One of the things that actually I find very funny is over the last several months, they drag out one useless witness after another that completely falls apart, and then you kind of wait for the next one. And the most recent ones have been Papadopoulos, which was humorous, and the Manacor, which wasn't so funny, but he didn't get anywhere with that one. And now he's got somebody that everybody is on tenterhooks waiting to see, oh, what's Flynn going to say? Now we've really got somebody. And the DNC people seem to be kind of excited that now, oh boy, and the anti-Trump people seem to be excited, as if this one, all the others didn't work, but this one, aha, now we've got somebody. And then after the Flynn thing falls apart, who's next? Do they run out of people that they can drag in and try to build up this story? And again, when I say this story, I mean the one about the fake one about the Russian hacking. But is there anything more to this? And is there anything deeper to this? And who is pushing this besides Mueller? Who's really behind Mueller if it's not the DNC?
Well, that's the crucial question. But let's just settle the question of Flynn. Unless Flynn has some knowledge that no one else does, that Putin told Trump, I'll get you elected, and then you have to work with the Russian ambassador to be good to us. Mm-hmm. If that were the case, well, fine, then Mueller would have something. But that's not the case. The Russians aren't that stupid. They're also not that powerful. Mm-hmm. I mean, Putin said, if you read the American media, you must think I'm the most powerful man in the world. I can put $100,000 of Facebook ads in the United States and elect a president. Hillary Clinton spent over $1 billion and couldn't get elected. So it shows you that Putin must be the most powerful man in the world. Now, your question is the key one. The DNC is not behind this. The DNC got taken over by Hillary Clinton. Now the question is, who is Hillary working with? Who is Obama working with? And what are they trying to protect? That's the deep state. And that's where you see why they want a continued policy of war, bailouts, and austerity. Mm-hmm. The Western financial system is heading toward bankruptcy. And the people who run it know that. There are trillions of dollars of unsustainable debt. American household debt is approaching $13 trillion. That's private household debt. That's you, me, and your next door neighbor. It's credit card debt, it's student loan debt, it's car debt, it's housing debt. That's not going to be covered. They've built up a stock market bubble, which they're calling a recovery. That will eventually pop, probably in the near to midterm. The European banking system is a complete mess. It's collapsing. The nations such as Italy and Spain can't pay their debts. Greece can't pay their debt. The United Kingdom can't pay its debt. That was partly what was behind Brexit. So this financial system needed to find another source of liquidity. China to jump in and back them. This goes back now 2 or 3 years. And the Chinese and the Russians both said, no, we're going in a different direction. We're not going to buy Western bank. Let Western banks come into our country speculate. We want to build. And that's what the Belt and Road Initiative of China is, which is now involving over 70 nations. It's moving into Europe, into Greece, into Austria, into Eastern Europe. The French are interested now. Trump is interested in it. Trump was in China to meet with Xi Jinping about it. So you have a shift away from a speculative, worthless money system toward a credit system which invests in something physical, in the physical economy. That's what we used to do. Now, if that happens, what happens to the debt? The hundreds of trillions of dollars of derivative obligations on the books of Western banks. What happens to the stock market bubble when it pops? What happens to the household debt? What happens to the federal debt? It's going to collapse in a pile of worthless paper. And so what they are trying to do, and by they now I mean the interlocking financial elites who are part of the military-industrial complex, the Chief Manhattans or J.P. Morgan Chase, the Lloyds of London, the Santander Bank of Spain, the City of London, the Bundesbank, the European Central Bank, the Federal Reserve System.
Goldman Sachs.
These are all interlocking financial networks that have controlled through think tanks and institutions and private consultants and pharmaceuticals and insurance companies and others control the U.S. government. Now, Trump, whether he ever will clean out the swamp or not, said he was going to start by talking to Putin and the Chinese. And this threatens everything. And that's why they launched the original story of Russiagate. And it was done from British intelligence, the GCHQ, that brought in this guy Christopher Steele and Fusion GPS. Hillary Clinton and the Democratic National Committee paid for it. And now it's coming out, Jim, and this is the news story, the breaking story. This guy Stroke, the FBI agent, the number 2 counterintelligence guy, who's obviously not too intelligent, who under Comey was in charge of the Hillary Clinton email investigation. He was the one who later, with Mueller, interrogated Flynn. And he was fired from Mueller's staff because he and his mistress were exchanging text messages derogative toward Trump and supportive of Hillary Clinton. So you have an operative in the deep state who also, by the way, may have been the person handling for the FBI the work of Christopher Steele and Fusion GPS. So it all begins to fit together, doesn't it? The Democratic Party was used to stop Trump out of the fear that Trump might break the existing geopolitical arrangement.
Can you remind us of what fusion is? That's one question. Another question before I forget it is, since I'm writing the review of Bush and Cheney now, I'm a little bit focused on the history of the neocon movement and how Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton picked up the mantle of the neocon movement. In fact, they fanned the flames and added fuel to the neocon movement. And the evidence there is the huge increase in drone activity and the contacts through all the central banks and how that system works. The TPP, which was apparently one of the big assignments that Barack Obama had. So I'm wondering how the Cheney push has been a continuum and how Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, hopefully, please tell me they're the tail end of this, and that what you're saying might actually happen, because the TPP was sort of, would have been competitive, I think, with all the wonderful activity now going on in China and Russia and building that financial network and the Silk Road and all that kind of thing. So the neocons would definitely have tried to quash that, and their marriage with Israel would have tried to quash that. And then, of course, Syria is sort of a proxy war going on there, which is part of all of that. So back to my question, how does the fusion business fit into that? And is this the end of the neocon movement?
Well, Fusion GPS was set up by some former Wall Street Journal reporters and became essentially a clearinghouse for a whole series of operations coordinated through British intelligence, the GCHQ. They hired a man named Christopher Steele, who was an ex-MI6 agent, supposedly a Russia expert, who wrote this dossier that, among other things, claimed that Trump was cavorting with prostitutes in a hotel room in Moscow that was videotaped by Putin, so Putin has Trump by the well-known organ. Now, most of this has been completely discredited, but the Fusion GPS bill was paid for by the Hillary Clinton Democratic National Committee and was then brought to the FBI's attention by, among others, John McCain, who one ordinarily wouldn't think of McCain and Hillary in the same breath unless you understand what you just said about the neocons.
Yeah.
Because this is what we're dealing with. It's a neo-conservative, neoliberal fusion. Not Fusion GPS, but the elite at the top.
Yeah.
The Bush crowd, the Rumsfelds, the Wolfowitz, Kagan.
Yes.
Kagan, who was Robert Kagan, who's one of the key guys in this neocon movement, his wife was is Victoria Nuland.
Yes.
Who was Hillary's Deputy Secretary of State for Eastern Europe.
And Kagan was an author
who ran with the National Endowment for Democracy the coup in Ukraine that overthrew an elected government. The key to understanding Obama and Hillary as a continuation of the Bush policy is regime change. Samantha Power at the United Nations, Susan Rice at the National Security Agency, the Libya war, the attempt to overthrow Assad, the overthrow of the Ukrainian government, and then targeting Russia. That's the neocons. That is the whole theory behind this idea of a unipolar world that goes back to the Project for a New American Century, which people associate correctly with Wolfowitz, Lynn Cheney, Rumsfeld, and others, but Hillary completely signed on to that, as did Obama. And under Obama, who got a Nobel Prize because he said he was going to do away with nuclear weapons, he was the author of the $1 trillion upgrade of the U.S. nuclear program that Trump initially was talking about signing on to. Now, this then connects this idea of a unipolar world, and after the Cold War, there can only be one power, and that's the U.S. and its allies or its satraps. That connects to such things as the TPP, the TTIP, the idea that under free trade, you'll have corporate cartels determining economic policy, that national legal systems have no say in disputes that occur under TPP and TTIP jurisdiction, so that nation states become irrelevant, which means that if a government is a good government that's trying to make sure its people have safe products and clean food and so on, they can be overruled by the corporate cartels controlling these free trade agreements. That's what Obama signed us on to. That's what Hillary called the gold standard in free trade agreements. Now, people in the United States are legitimately suspicious about free trade after what happened with NAFTA and what's happened with the outsourcing, the shutting down of our manufacturing, the loss of 6 million industrial jobs since 2001. So there was a reaction against it. Now, I'm not saying Trump has all the answers or the solutions or that he's the answer. What I'm saying is that on these key issues, as he showed when he first came in and took the U.S. out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, he's on opposite sides with the neocons.
Yeah.
Now, a problem that he has is he has neocons in his administration. They're still in the State Department. They still, I think, control the intelligence community, the CIA and the FBI. And it doesn't matter whether they're Democrats or Republicans. They function on behalf of this supranational government. And, some people may say, well, isn't that conspiracy theory? It's not conspiracy theory. Who do you think drafted the TPP? Did it come out of small town communities? Did it come out of local congressmen?
I didn't draft it. You didn't draft it. And why was it secret?
I never even saw it until it became...
Yeah. Well, I think the activists...
So this is how they operate.
The activists that I know and have worked with against the TPP, and it was a huge push, were upset because of the loss of sovereignty that every state had to abide by that. The states would be sued by oil companies or whatever. And so the activism was doubled. It wasn't just a job thing. It was a loss of sovereignty thing. And if it hadn't been so secret, that's the other thing that got us all riled up. Well, if it's so great, why don't you tell us what it is? How come Congress can't even find out what it is? So I was thrilled when it met its, when it went into its death throes.
Well, but this brings us back now to Mueller, because one of the key things in understanding Mueller is he goes back to the time of 9/11 when he came in as FBI director.
Yeah.
He covered up for the deep state, which included the Bush-Cheney-Saudi connection. That goes back to the 1980s. Remember Iran-Contra and Afghanistan?
Sure do.
We were working together with the Bin Laden jihadist movement. And by we, I mean that was the Republicans, the right wing, at the time. They owned that. Now, this is the history of the U.S.-Saudi relationship. Goes back to the British role in bringing the Saud family as a bunch of tribal nomads in to become the monarchs of the Arabian Peninsula. And the fact that they had oil meant they were wealthy enough to become geopolitical players. But they were completely protected. And they're not just on the question of 9/11, but on everything else, the funding of Al-Qaeda, the global terrorist movement, the ISIS operation. Now, this was something that Bush passed on to Obama. One of the interesting things about Michael Flynn, and he's also kind of a mixed character, but as the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, he was blowing the whistle on U.S. arms that went to jihadists in Libya, that were then transshipped through Benghazi to Turkey and ended up in the hands of ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria. That's why he was fired by Obama. Obama said he was a poor manager. Yeah, he didn't manage to keep the secrets.
Yeah, okay.
And that's why he was in trouble.
And I did interview the former ambassador to Syria, who explained how a lot of these arms ended up in the hands of ISIS. And he said it wasn't like Hillary was actually selling them to ISIS or giving them to ISIS. It just worked out that way because of the kind of complicated passage of arms that you're talking about. So Mueller was...
I just want to finish this point, because the other thing Mueller did during his time as FBI director is engage in a brutal campaign against whistleblowers and was very much at the center of the operation to establish the surveillance state that Ed Snowden exposed. And that Clapper was someone who followed up what Mueller was doing, as did Comey. So here you have, the fact that progressives are so-called progressives are cheering on Mueller. Do they forget that it was the CIA and the FBI, the same people who were going after Trump, who ran Guantanamo, the waterboarding and torturing? It was Brennan as CIA director, who was hacking into the Senate Intelligence Committee computers to try and stop the investigation of torture. These are the great heroes of America now. Brennan, Clapper, Comey, and Mueller. These are the people who are trying to establish a deep state police state in this country to silence opposition to this global anti-sovereignty, free trade, bankers' dictatorship. And
Mueller,
now they can be exposed.
Well, Mueller, it seems to me, was put in place as director of the FBI so that he could quash the existing investigations that were pre-9/11 investigations. And we talked about this last time, which was the Phoenix memo, Minneapolis memo, and the Chicago memos, which were related. Mueller came in and quashed that. Now, that's treason. And Ashcroft was working with him, and Tenet was working with him. So these, like you said, they're the darlings now. And they're the darlings for a reason. And you've explained it, but could you go a little bit more into why it is so important that Mueller be the guy who is where he is right now?
Jim, you broke up there for a second. You were asking me about who?
Why is, well, I mentioned Tenet and Mueller in the same breath because they were brought in to their positions to make sure that any investigation was quashed. And, of course, the New York Times was fine with that. They didn't want to investigate anything like that. So why? So my question was, why is Mueller the guy, and why is it so important for the media to keep him up on some sort of pedestal when he's clearly a traitor? But why Mueller, and why is it so important for them to keep him in the position that he's in now?
Well, they've built up a reputation for him which is not deserved. The straight shooter, the straight arrow, the honest, trustworthy guy, the hard worker with no agenda. It's completely false. Same thing with Comey. Same exact thing with Comey.
Okay.
And so what you're dealing with here, and did I just turn on? No, okay. I just thought maybe my camera went off there. What you're dealing with Mueller is an operative for the deep state.
Okay.
He's been at this for a long time. As we report, LaRouche PAC reported in the dossier we put out, titled Robert Mueller is an amoral legal assassin. He was involved in the original Get LaRouche task force at a high level. What was the charge against LaRouche from the FBI in 1982? That he might be operating on behalf of the Soviet Union to convince Reagan to negotiate with Russia on the Strategic Defense Initiative, when in fact it was the other way around. Reagan brought LaRouche in to negotiate with the Soviet Union to get them to accept the idea of sharing the anti-missile technology. The Kissinger-Bush crowd at the time wanted to stop LaRouche, and they assigned it to William Weld, and who was Weld's assistant? Robert Mueller. And when Weld went higher up in the DOJ, Mueller became the U.S. attorney in Boston who ran the LaRouche case, that was thrown out of the court by the judge who said it was prosecutorial misconduct. Textbook case of prosecutorial misconduct.
So I link...
Then it went to Alexandria.
Okay. I link Mueller with Lee Hamilton, who is the guy you got to call when you have to get the big boys off the hook, because he was involved in the BCCI, letting them get away with murder in BCCI, and Lee Hamilton, of course, was called in to handle the 9/11 Commission. I don't think Governor Kane was particularly up on what had to be done, but Lee Hamilton certainly knew how to help Zelikow steer destroy evidence, let me put it that way. So Mueller did his part by quashing investigations Tenet did his part by quashing investigations. Lee Hamilton did his part by making sure evidence never got to the 9/11 Commission, but particularly Zelikow is the big villain here. He made sure that they didn't get anything close and that the family members who had insisted on this would be frustrated from the very beginning. So you've got the players together, and what I hope we've explained today is why it was so important to keep Mueller in the game, and why it's important for him to be sort of the cleanup hitter now, and the guy that they think is going to bring down Trump.
Well, he's a thug with a track record. He's done the job for them before, and he's still doing it. He knows how to use the media. You know, it's ironic when you look at I thought it was kind of funny this last weekend. Not funny, but a case study. The argument that Trump is about to fire Rex Tillerson, when Tillerson is engaged in intense discussion with Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, about a peaceful reconstruction in Syria. And he's engaged in extensive discussion with the Chinese on how to work on North Korea. And the New York Times and the Washington Post say that Trump's about to fire him, which, again, is undermining the administration. Now, if that's what Flynn was accused of doing by talking to the Russians, undermining the administration, yes, they were trying to undermine the Obama policy. But what's the New York Times and the Washington Post? What's their game?
Well, their game is
understand
war.
It is their part of the deep state.
Yeah, well, their game is war. It seems to me. That seems to be their. Go ahead.
They're like John McCain. They haven't met a war they can't embrace or start.
Yeah. Well, in my review, I said neocons.
So we're dealing with and remember the media.
Remember what?
The media is part of the interlocking corporate cartels. The people who run the media. You look at Bezos. I mean, everyone says Amazon, that's the new technology. Well, Bezos just signed a $600 million contract to be the cloud contractor for the CIA with Amazon.
Okay. One line that I put in my review was, neocons, fear not. The New York Times has your back.
Yeah. And for a long time. Look, they've run stories on Ukraine that are completely false. We now see Saakashvili, the former Georgia president, who was the great hero when he was standing up against the Russians. Saakashvili brought terrorists, ISIS terrorists, to Ukraine to join with the neo-Nazis against the Eastern ethnic Russian population in Ukraine. Now he's leading a mob trying to get rid of Poroshenko. So you have the two groupings of the neocons at each other's throats, not surprisingly. So, you know, I think if things were just left on their own, eventually we'd end up in World War III, nuclear war, financial collapse. But we can't do that. We've got to get the story out, as you're doing, on who is Mueller, who's behind him, and what are they trying to do. And ultimately, their strategy is to prevent a U.S.-Russian cooperation in the Middle East, to prevent a U.S.-Russia-China cooperation in Eurasia on economic development, and it's to support a Saudi-Israeli terror axis that has as its immediate target Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Iran, but the real target is Russia and China.
Okay.
And the fact that this is not commented on, I mean, if you want to talk about collusion and meddling, what about the Israelis and the U.S. politics?
Well, that's what pushed me over the edge and got me kicked off my radio program, I think, is when I pledged to boycott Israel for its, you have to pledge allegiance to Israel before you can get relief for your house being flooded in Dickinson, Texas, and that has extended to the teacher in Kansas and, you know, maybe to me when I lost my position at the radio station. I don't know that. They would certainly not admit that. But in the case of Dickinson, Texas, it's in black and white. And that kind of pushed me over the edge. I was never fond of genocide, so that had me over the edge a long time ago. And when I learned about the USS Liberty, and there's a guy I have to strongly disagree with, all my people, everybody I know loves him, but I think he's much too optimistic. His last name is Steele. Is it David? Is it the ex-CIA guy that has all this good news about the end of the Israeli supremacy in the U.S. and stuff like that?
No, I think there's going to be a continuing fight on that. But here's what I would recommend: if people want to get the deep story on Mueller, we put out a dossier which is available on our website, LaRouchePAC.com, called "Robert Mueller is an Amoral Legal Assassin. He will do his job if you let him."
Yeah.
And it goes through these 3 case studies: the LaRouche case, his role as FBI director in protecting the Saudis and putting in the surveillance state, and now his role as a point man for the operation to destroy an elected American president. So if people go to LaRouchePAC.com, that's LaRouchePAC.com, you can get a copy of of that dossier. You can download it. Now, if you want to see the articles I'm writing, and I'm writing weekly articles on this, you go to a page on LaRouche PAC. It's under lpac.co/Harley, Harley. So it's lpac.co/Harley. And I've written a series of articles, and I will have another one this week expanding on what you and I have been talking about tonight. Okay. Or I guess it's daytime over there.
So you and I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. What do you really think is going to happen with the Flynn story? And do you have a crystal ball that is that it for them, or are they going to keep going?
No, I mean, look, they're not going to give up. They can't. Everything's at stake for them. Mm-hmm. You know, look, they just put Brian Ross on a 4-week suspension. You know, Brian Ross has been a liar for years. He's another one who used to attack LaRouche all the time. He's the one who claimed LaRouche was going to kill Jimmy Carter with a remote control bomb from a telephone. Okay. That's the Brian Ross who was just thrown off, ABC now. Oh, okay. So they're going to keep doing this. This is their life. This is their future. Mm-hmm. They're fully committed. You know, as you say, they're all in. So, and I wanted to ask you about what is extremely humorous, a story with RT, Russia Today, and how they pulled their press credentials on the grounds that they were foreign. Well, what about the BBC? What about Haaretz? What about France Press? What about Australia? I mean, all these foreign press agencies are there. So are they going to... What's up with that? The combined effect of Russiagate and the anti-Russian activities is criminalizing what was normally accepted behavior. Foreign correspondents go to press conferences and ask questions and write stories. Are you going to shut that down because you don't like their stories? What happened to freedom of the press? Now, here we are, we attack the Russians because we say they don't have free press. And what do? We throw the Russians out for reporting what actually turns out to be truthful reports on what's happening in the United States. And they aren't even Russians. I mean, those reporters... It's Alice Wonderland through the looking glass. Yeah. And everybody that I've heard interviewed said when they go in to do an interview or a story on Russia Today, there's no discussion about what you can say and what you can't. Whereas he says that these people say whenever you have to appear on CNN or anywhere else, there's a list of things you're not even allowed to talk about. So the irony is, obvious, there it is. Well, thank you, Harley. Jim, I commend you for what you're doing, because you're a voice out there. You're continuing in spite of losing your radio station, and best of luck to you, and anything I can do to help, let me know.
All right. Well, I will be in the Philippines for a month. I may be looking into some things there, just vacation. But we can stay in touch via, all these mechanisms that exist today. So that'll be exciting. And thank you again. Do you have any final news for us?
No, just people should be optimistic. The human race is characterized by a quality of creativity. And the efforts to suppress that, whether it's by the Nazis, by Stalinist dictatorship, or by the media control in the United States, people will seek the truth. Jim, there's an old Yiddish proverb, the truth never dies, but it lives a miserable life. Our job is to protect and defend that miserable life so that it can do some good and act on the world and maybe free us from some of these elites whose arrogance has brought us to the brink of destruction.
All right. Well, thank you, and thanks everybody for watching this, and hopefully you can send it on. I will post it with Facebook, and then if I get my head on straight, I will post it to YouTube. So,
okay.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Good being with you.